and oyster diving, obviously, for the invitation, for organizing the whole thing. My name is Elke. I want to talk about sharks of the Red Sea. So Mark gave you a little bit of our personal history about how we actually started basically diving together. So I'm going to give you a bit more of an introduction about who I am and why I'm actually talking to you about sharks on this kind of platform. And of course, talk you through what I'm planning on talking about exactly throughout this webinar, presentation, meeting, whatever we want to call it, with this technology. Yeah, and Mark and I think Tracy will keep track of questions. And we agreed that if basically at the end of a chapter, if there's any questions that fit to the subject that I haven't answered, then they're going to basically ask them straight away in your name. And then, of course, in the end, there'll be more options for questions as well. Okay, so I hope that works for everyone. So a bit of an introduction then. Who am I? I'm a biologist. My name is Elke. I'm originally from Germany, and that's where I studied. And then I finished my studies in biology with a PhD on the behavior and on the communication of bottlenose dolphins. That was in 2002, incredibly already. Then about 2 years later, I threw in my second passion or hobby or major interest, that was the diving, and started working on Egyptian liverboards in April 2004. And about 6 months later, I came across these beautiful sharks that you see there on the picture already on the left-hand side, the Oceanics, or Longimanus as well. And I started studying them. And that has been actually the start of my sort of shark research career, if you like. So the Longimanus project, which is still ongoing. And then I expanded the research while I continued working on the Egyptian liverboards and using them as a platform. And eventually I founded the Red Sea Shark Trust, and that was now in 2012. And this is now the umbrella organization for both the research projects that I'm still running here in Egypt, and also the kind of awareness and educational programs that I'm doing. Yeah, so this is who I am. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm talking about this. So basically, I'm a combination of a biologist and a dive guide that has been studying sharks in the Egyptian Red Sea since 2004. So what do I want to talk about today? A bit of an outline of this presentation, just very quickly, the different sort of chapters I want to talk about. I want to introduce you or give you some details on the most common Red Sea shark species. I'm going to focus on the ones that you have a realistic chance of actually seeing when you're coming on a liverboard. And that means on a liverboard that focuses on the area sort of Brother Islands and further south. So starting from Hurghada or Port Ghalib. I don't want to dismiss the rest of the Egyptian Red Sea, Tiran or Ras Mohammed or any places like this, but this is very simply the areas that I've done most of my trips in, where I have most of the experience and where I collected most of my data. So this is where I feel most qualified to talk about. There's definitely stuff to be seen up in the north as well. Not only wrecks and reefs and that stuff, there's also sharks, but as I said, I'm going to focus on the liverboards and on the itineraries that I mainly did over the last 17 years, just to give you basically the majority or the biggest sort of like benefit from my experience. So common Red Sea shark species, how to identify them, where and when are the best basically places and times to dive with them. This is a bit of the idea of this first introduction. And then of course, we're talking about diving. So I want to talk about how to dive with these sharks here in Egypt. That's a little bit of the background, what the legal situation here is, how we're approaching this, and of course a bit of the guidelines that keep the diving with sharks safe. I'm going to mention, of course, my major study object, because they're very special when it comes to their behavior around divers. So just quick outline, some recommendations on the do's and don'ts when it comes to diving with sharks. And then also I want to tell you a little bit more about the Red Sea Shark Trust. I gave you a very quick intro about what it's all about, so a few more details, bit about the motivation behind it, and of course the aims and like the goals of this trust, and what I'm doing with it and why I'm doing what I'm doing with it. And as a final part of this one, I want to introduce you to the new platform that I'm using now for my trips and for my research, which I'm very excited about. And then after this, Mark will jump in a little bit more talking about the plans that we made, actually, Mark and oyster diving and myself, for some trips in the near future. Yeah, so this is the outline. This is what it's going to be, and I hope you'll enjoy it. So let's get going. Right, so common Red Sea shark species, starting with one that I think a lot of you might have seen already. For the others, it should definitely still be on the bucket list if you were not lucky yet. I'm talking about hammerheads, more specifically about the scalloped hammerhead shark, which is the more common of the two hammerhead shark species we have here in the Egyptian Red Sea. Now, of course, if you see them like the lower one here, this hammerhead that I'm just pointing at it with my cursor, which I hope you can see, obviously that's an easy one to recognize. If you can actually see the hammer, also known as the cephalofoil, then it is really not rocket science to tell that it's a hammerhead shark. But have a quick look at the shark above that is actually closer to the camera, which is full on from the side. Now it's close enough that you can also still see the hammer actually, but imagine that shark being a bit further away and you wouldn't actually really be able to tell that this head is extended to the side the way that it is. So you can still tell it's a hammerhead shark actually, and the way that you do that is looking at a proportion which helps you with identifying a lot of shark species out there. Of course, a lot of them will mainly be silhouettes and you won't get very close to them, unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, but this is generally how a lot of these encounters go. So if you look at this dorsal fin, it's high, it's triangular with a slightly rounded tip, and it's actually not sitting quite in the middle of the body, it's sitting a little bit further towards the head. And these proportions will tell you, even without seeing the hammer clearly, that this is a hammerhead shark and that this is a scalloped hammerhead shark. Yeah, so just I'll point out these proportions for some of the other shark species as well, because as I said, even a silhouette in the distance will still allow you then to identify what you're actually looking at or what you might have seen. Okay, so scalloped hammerhead sharks, as I said, here in Egypt, we are not Cocos or Galapagos. We don't tend to see them in their hundreds. If we're lucky and in the right season, we might get to see a school of scalloped hammerhead sharks. The main luck that I've had was Daedalus Reef. So up in this little table, you see the best season and the best sites to look for these sharks specifically. So generally we have a chance of seeing them all year round, but definitely the best season as far as I'm concerned and from the experience from the last 17 years is May to July. And then, yeah, the itinerary should definitely include Daedalus Reef, Brothers and Elphinstone at the same time. You have very good chances as well. I could name a few more sites. St. John's Plateau as well is actually quite good. But for the school of hammerheads, Daedalus, and school means here, if you're lucky, 15, 20, 25, maybe 30. And if you're extremely lucky, you might see a few more than 30. Yeah, but this is definitely one of the sharks that we have very close encounters with, maybe not the numbers of other places, but of course, if it's in a few that are curious and that hang around you, that is still a very, very special thing to have. So that's species number one that I wanted to introduce. The second one, again, is actually quite a special one, and the Red Sea is largely underrated when it comes to these sharks. I'm talking about pelagic thresher, as you see now on your screen. A very, very special shark in terms of their shape, of course, in terms of what they look like. And most people actually, when they think pelagic thresher, think Philippines and Malapascua. That is the prime site where people are traveling and where they have, again, very high success rate of seeing these sharks. But actually here in the Red Sea, we're also quite lucky with them generally. And of course, this is a shark, I don't even really have to show you, that is extremely easy to identify. No other silhouette out there looks like this. So this massively long tail, especially the upper lobe, will clearly identify this thresher shark. And the ones that we have here are the same like in the Philippines, the pelagic thresher, that is the Indo-Pacific species. It's sort of like tropical and warm waters. So again, here in the Red Sea, as I said, we see them very regularly, actually all year round. They tend to disappear a little bit in the really hot, like summer months. And also in the busy months, because it's quite a shy shark species. But even if it's not between November and March, which I would consider the best season to see them, we can find them. They just tend to be a bit deeper. So the encounters don't tend to be as close, especially for recreational divers. From November to March, cooler temperatures, less divers generally. And then we can be lucky and might see them even as shallow as 20, 25 meters. And of course, with the visibility here in the Red Sea, that can be then really beautiful encounters like the one that you actually see. That picture was taken here in Egypt at the Brothers. And yeah, that shark was no deeper than 20, 25 meters. So that was, I think, taken in December. So that is pretty much what I'm trying to say. Yeah, so again, you'd have to go to Brothers or Daedalus. These guys are open ocean sharks. They come to visit these offshore pinnacles and then they leave. They don't hang around long, but yeah, seeing them, even just the silhouette is actually quite special as well. Okay, so there we have common Red Sea shark species number 2. The next ones you are probably familiar with already, a fairly common reef shark, the gray reef shark, a very classic shark shape. You can see them in the Maldives as well, here in Egypt, and a lot of other places across the Indo-Pacific, actually. And the main criteria to be sure that you see a gray reef shark is this black bar all along the tail. That's the only reef shark that has it to this extent. Here in Egypt, you can also use the first dorsal fin, sorry, which has a white tip on it. In some other populations across the Indo-Pacific, the dorsal fin might be all gray. So the sure criteria is the black bar along the tail. These guys, as the name says, are reef sharks associated with reefs, especially with drop-offs, because that's where they find their food. And this is a shark that likes current. So a bit tricky for us potentially, but the stronger the current, the more likely we are to find them. And that also explains why the main places that we see them are the Brothers, Daedalus as well, and in the right season also St. John's. And again, season is not very clear. It seems to go mainly along the water temperatures, like with some other sharks. So from October to June, we can see them. July to September, the water tends to be a bit too warm. So this could mean that they're just deeper and we don't see them, or a little bit further out. That's of course difficult to tell, but they're much more difficult to find, much more difficult to encounter in the hot summer months, basically, with the maximum water temperatures that we have. But from sort of, in the meantime, so October to June, the chances are high. May to June, especially also then on the St. John's Plateau. Yeah, so again, for season and for sites, this is where you should be. And again, that goes obviously, this is liveaboards. This is all places that daily boats cannot reach. Now, just in case you're interested, the picture actually that you see there, this is a quite special situation. The animal in the foreground, the larger one, is a female. And she looks quite battered, and that is an indication for courtship and mating behavior to go on. And that's actually exactly what's happening in the picture, because the animal in the background, the much smaller one, is a male, and he's basically trying to court this female. And that in sharks involves quite rough behavior, including biting and trying to hold on. So while the exact mating in sharks is often very secretive and rarely observed, but these so-called nuptial bites that are a result of this activity can be a very clear indicator that it's happening or has just happened. So if you ever come across a shark, especially a female, with scratches and bite wounds like this, then she probably was the focus of a few males because it was mating season. Yeah, so this is in this case for the gray reef shark. And now number 4, I'm including one that we on the liveaboards, especially in the marine parks and at the drop-offs, are actually not seeing that frequently, but it is sometimes occurring there, and it is the most common reef shark of the whole Indo-Pacific region, which includes the Red Sea. That's a white-tip reef shark. Yeah, so this one is, again, if you look at the proportions of the body to the dorsal fin, this is one where you can work with this very easily, even if you see them in blue water, because this is a very slender cigar-shaped body, and it has a small triangular dorsal fin with a white tip on it. So this is something that you can use to identify the shark, even as a silhouette if it's free swimming. The reason why the marine parks and the drop-offs are not the best place to see them is exactly the behavior that you see on this picture, because white-tip reef sharks actually spend their days lying around on sandy bottom, underneath overhangs, sometimes in caves or just under table corals, because they're resting. And they prefer to do this rather shallow. So of course, sandy bottom in the marine parks very often only starts very deep and is a very steep slope, which is not really what these guys are looking for. So it's not the first or most common shark species we see out there, but we do have overhangs with sandy patches underneath, even at the Brothers. So even sometimes we do see these sharks there. So if I give you a best time and the best sites from the places that we're generally or regularly going to, it would be the St. John's Plateau, because there is not only drop-offs there, but also some nice shallow coral gardens and reefs. where these guys are living. But actually, this is a shark species that you can also see fairly regularly when you're just doing daily diving trips, or if you're starting trips from Hurghada, you're going up to the north. This would be a shark species that you can come across actually all year round. Yeah, so that's one to look out for as well. I think now we're at number 5. This one basically finishes the regular sort of like sharks that are connected to reefs. It might be drop-offs, but rather connected to reefs. At least this is the activity that brings them in so that we can see them close to the reefs. And now there's another 2 that are a bit different, and that will also result in a slightly different sort of diving behavior with them, which I will come to in the next chapter. Of course, I'm talking first of all about my major study subjects, the oceanic white-tip shark, a very notorious shark, if you like, very often described as dangerous and aggressive. And for those that have been with me before, I much prefer the descriptive terms of being self-confident and inquisitive. So these guys are actually one of the attraction points of going here on Egyptian liveaboards, especially, of course, for shark lovers. Very, very, very easy to identify. Major features: large rounded first dorsal fin and very long pectoral fins, also with a rounded tip. These long pectoral fins have given these sharks their scientific name. The word longimanus is actually Latin. It means long hand, and that is a reference to these pectoral fins. The other way to recognize them is by these actually very conspicuous color markings on all their fin tips. And additionally, also, where do we find them? They're very, very shallow normally. They're very interested in human activity, including the liveaboards and the zodiacs. So very often you will actually see these sharks before you're jumping in the water, because they're right around the boat that you're just jumping in the water from. So this is a very, very special thing about them as well. Okay, so these guys, they have normally a very clear season. We had a couple of years where we actually had them all year round, so that happens occasionally, but very generally over the last 17 years, the best season to see them was October, November. And since this is an open ocean or pelagic shark, you would expect to see them at these offshore pinnacles that are surrounded by and very close to deep water, which is their main habitat. So again, we're talking about the classic marine park trip, Daedalus, Brothers, and also Elphinstone. Yeah, so this is the main place to see them. And then very similar in behavior and environment to these oceanic white-tip sharks is the last one that I want to introduce in greater detail. That's the silky shark. Besides the oceanic, that is another one of my favorites. That's a beautiful shark, quite large, actually one of the largest ones we tend to see, fully grown, about 3 meters, whereas the others tend to sort of hover around the 2–2.5 meter mark as a maximum, except for the thresher with a massively long tail, but the body actually is not that big. So these guys come around not so regularly. And of course, if you look at the shark, not really many color markings there. So to tell you, explain to you how to identify them, I have to go back to proportions to a certain degree. So considering their whole body shape, they're quite long and slender. And in the middle of this slender body, they actually have a rather smallish triangular dorsal fin, which mostly has a rounded tip as well. Like the oceanics, very often they come around the boats. They're interested in this activity. And then if you see them in shallow water like the oceanic, you might notice something else that will help you identify them, which actually has given them their common name. And that is a bit of a metallic tinge to their body. Yeah, they're very shiny. They're very, very silky, literally, when you look at them. So that makes them also so, as I would say, so attractive as a shark. And again, very similar in terms of being self-confident and being potentially quite curious also around divers. That makes them stick out as well. So it's not really seasonal, and we have like whole times where we don't see much of them. But again, over the years, if they are around, they tend to be around mostly from April to June. And again, like the oceanics, mostly close to their normal habitat, which is the open ocean. So again, offshore pinnacles, I'm repeating myself with that one, offshore pinnacles of Daedalus, Brother Islands, and also of Elphinstone. Yeah, so this is the ones. If we're going on a marine park trip, depending on the season, this is the main sharks that we are looking for. And this is the ones that we're hoping to interact with, actually. That's the idea. Now, there's of course a few others around. It's not that they're not common, but it's not that regular, and it's a lot more difficult to predict if or when they're gonna come around. You'll know them, probably at least most of them. I'll introduce another three. Of course, everybody has heard and potentially also already seen a whale shark. Now here in the Egyptian Red Sea, yes, they do pass by, but when and where exactly, that can be tricky. And actually in certain seasons, you're almost better off doing daily diving from Hurghada with very good chances of seeing these whale sharks instead of getting on a liveaboard. To be honest, there it's really seems to be more or less random. One might pass by and then you don't see them for months or maybe for a whole year, and then all of a sudden one of them pops in again. So for me, I cannot really find a proper pattern there. As I said, closer to the shore, for some of these daily dive sites, that seems to be almost more likely. Yeah, but you never know, it happens. This one was a sighting from the brothers, and actually this whale shark, weirdly enough, hung around for a full 3 days. Which is very, very unusual. It's just a matter of luck, obviously. So whale sharks can be an option. We do have tigers here in the Red Sea as well. Again, very unpredictable. We've had years, 2009, 2015, where they hung around in certain places for 1 or 2 months, and then they disappear again. Then you catch the odd glimpse of them, and really the only thing that you normally catch is a glimpse. They're very, very shy around divers in the conditions that we're diving in. So seeing one is actually very, very lucky. And unfortunately, as far as I'm concerned, because I really, really like these sharks, we see less and less silvertips. They've never been the most common sharks that we see, but the odd one we would see in Elphinstone, on the St. John's Plateau, at the Brothers. But for me personally, it has been actually now quite a few years. And yeah, I don't really know obviously why that is the case. But yeah, hopefully we're going to have some sightings again at some point in the near future. Yeah, so this is the idea. So this is the shark species that I wanted to talk about. Again, there can be surprises. The Red Sea actually still is very, very good for surprises. I can give you one more example. For the first time ever, I actually saw a so-called spinner shark here in the Red Sea, and that was last year on one of the few safaris that I was able to make at the Brothers. You probably never heard of spinner sharks. There's only one place actually that I'm aware of that divers can dive with them. They're pretty widespread, but they just tend to avoid anything where human activity is or divers are. So these spinner sharks that I have seen before were in the Maldives, a special place involving actually the leftovers of a fish processing plant. So that is a very, very special case. But other than that, I've never heard of divers actually encountering a spinner. And all of a sudden, there it was passing by along the reef, gone very quickly, but definitely a spinner shark. So surprises like this are always possible, which makes the diving obviously in the Red Sea that interesting. You never really know what you're going to see. And all in all, actually, we have a good 30 different shark species here. So yeah, there could be a few other surprises that I didn't mention now that you might come across on any of the liveaboards or even the daily dive sites that you might come and visit. Okay. So this is when it comes to shark species. Now, I don't know if there's any questions that anybody wanted to have answered at this point. So I would actually need a bit of an input from Mark if we're doing anything with this.
Yeah, I can come in. So we have got a couple of questions already. The first question we've got is from Andy, and he wants to know, with it being about a year now since really there's not been much diving in and around the Red Sea, do you know what the effects on the shark aggregations have been around Brothers and Daedalus so far?
Unfortunately, of course, I was also quite limited in my options to get out there. So the first trip that I actually did out in the Red Sea, that was pretty much immediately after the complete sort of like, we didn't have a complete lockdown, but there was no liveaboards, no diving allowed. That was in the beginning of July. And that was a marine park trip, Brothers, Daedalus, Elphinstone. And I thought actually it was, in terms of shark sightings, very, very typical. So the water was quite warm already. So there wasn't that many, especially, well, shallow hammerhead shark sightings. There was the odd oceanic that we had at the Brothers. Also the odd hammerhead at the Brothers and in Elphinstone. So this for me was quite typical. And then I managed to do another 3 trips throughout the year, September, and then later on October, late October, late November. And classically as well, the oceanics showed up right there and then in quite large numbers, especially in Daedalus. So I would say it was a rather typical part of that season. But of course, there is also the argument that for changes to actually really happen, even a few months or half a year might not be quite enough. And of course, there's another issue also when it comes to the rest of the marine, because of course, yeah, we're looking at sharks in the moment, but they're connected to the environment, obviously. And without any liveaboards out there, there was also a lot of people sort of out of business. And I think quite a few of them turned to or had to turn to fishing, not necessarily out in the marine parks, but more local sites. So a lot of divers, a lot of boats, there's also a lot of eyes out there that can report this kind of stuff. And of course, that also didn't happen. So it can go both ways. It can be a recovery effect, or it can actually lead to also more fishing activity out there. And that's very, very difficult to document or to know if it has happened or to which degree.
Cool. So the next question, I think you're probably going to come on to this anyway, but I'll ask it now, and if you want to defer it, you can do. So somebody wants to know if there's anything that divers can do or avoid doing to antagonize or upset sharks, or might make them more aggressive.
Yeah, the next one is going to be diving with sharks. So I'm going to mention a few of the do's and don'ts for the what I would call normal sharks, and of course also for the oceanics. I'm going to do this in rather broad strokes. So if there's still any questions open, I would say we ask this after the next chapter, and then I can go into more detail if that's
Cool.
if that's one.
Yeah, so I think the other questions, apart from one of them so far, you'll cover off. But one question, which is quite a nice question, is how about black tips? Can they be found in the Red Sea?
Well, officially, yes, we have both. We have the blacktip reef shark and then what a lot of you call the oceanic blacktip. On the liveaboards, blacktip reef sharks, we basically don't see them. This is a rather coastal reef shark species. We have the classic sort of shallow nursery grounds in the bay. So actually some of the camps and some of the house reefs, if they have like these shallow lagoon reef tops, they see them. And in some of them, they will then also see the odd adult on their dives, but this is more the daily dive operators that get lucky with those. And for the oceanic blacktips, I've only ever really heard of reasonably regular sightings around Ras Mohammed. That's the only place where I've ever seen them, although I'm really not diving up there that much, which is why I'm not really talking about the sightings up there in great detail. But even there, for the last few years, the sightings of the blacktips, oceanic blacktips, has been very rare from what I understand up there. So if they report any sightings, as far as I'm aware, it's like hammerheads off the back of Jackson, the odd grey reef shark in Tirana as well. Maybe the odd tiger, especially for tech divers, but oceanic blacktips I haven't really heard of a lot for a few years, unfortunately.
Cool. Okay. I'll let you get on with the rest of the presentation, and then we'll go through some more of the questions, because I think a lot of these you will cover off anyway. So. Okay,
cool. So then I would just check in with you again after the next chapter if there's anything more about the diving with sharks and stuff. Okay.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
All right. So then let's talk about diving with sharks. So especially, again, I'm talking about diving with sharks in Egypt now, because even in some other countries here in the Red Sea, that might look and go slightly differently. And you understand why when I'm just continuing now. The main thing is actually that here in Egypt, we're looking at natural encounters with these wild predators. And what that means is it is illegal here in Egypt to chum or bait or feed sharks. Now, I'm not saying that these rules are always stuck to. By most people they are. Sometimes there's some unintentional sort of rewarding of sharks. But okay, generally, we're not taking part in like planned baited dives or chumming sharks. That obviously has a few consequences for these encounters. It means, first of all, it's a lot less predictable what we're going to see. But of course, on the other hand, you can argue that what we actually do see is more special because there's no incentive to lure these predators in. They're coming on their own volition because they're interested and because we're not doing anything to chase them away. Yeah, so obviously without an incentive and without really attracting them, we also need to be a lot more careful with our behavior so that we're not actually sort of spoiling the encounters ourselves. And from this point forward, I'm going to split what I'm saying now into basically two parts. For the first part, I want to talk about how to dive with what I would say like the normal sort of like reef sharks, and I'm putting them in. So I'm talking about the ones that I mentioned, like the hammerheads, like the pelagic thresher, and of course on the right side you see a grey reef shark. So with these guys, we actually have to be quite careful because generally they are quite easily intimidated by human activities, by the presence of humans. And that is, again, yeah, because of activity levels, because of noise levels as well. So activity means basically your movements. Are you very active? Are you moving your hands a lot? Are you also after like breathing a lot, which is obviously goes to the noise factor already, but noise also can go into the direction of people that are having any noise making instruments, rattles, shakes or anything. Now, I appreciate that they can be very important in getting somebody's attention. And of course, I'm not saying do not carry them, but when it comes to using them on sharks that are approaching, you might actually chase them away. Yeah, they might be quite shy. This can be especially true for the thresher sharks. Thresher sharks tend to be quite timid. Some of the others are a bit more tolerant, but generally your best chances of having a bit of a longer encounter, or of at least making these sharks comfortable enough to hang around and continue with what they were doing, is really to be as quiet and as calm as possible. Yeah, just that's recommendation number one. And of course, that also entails that you do not rush towards them or chase after them. Again, we're visiting a wild predator in its natural environment, so we want to have as little negative impact on them as possible. And quite frankly, sharks are top predators in their environments, and they're not used to being charged at or followed. And to be quite frank, and yeah, excuse my French, it scares the shit out of them if something our size is charging towards them or chases after them. So what you will do, if you're that person that for whatever reason just is so tempted and tries to get closer, what you will do is you chase a tail of the shark for a couple of seconds, then it will disappear, not come back. And potentially the people that are behind you or with you will not even have seen that tail, yeah, because it will be gone so quickly. So try to resist the urge. It comes from, yeah, interest, excitement, and I get that, or just the urge of getting a little bit closer for a camera or something like this. But yeah, it can actually finish what could have been a much longer encounter very, very quickly. Yeah, so try to be careful with that one. And then the last point that I want to make, just as I said, very broad and general strokes, try not to harass them or disturb them in any way. Now you probably think that'll be difficult anyway, so superior, so much faster, so much more maneuverable than we are. So especially when it comes to disturbing them, I'm talking about one actually specific situation where this is important. These guys are not so much the hammerheads that you see the picture of there on that screen, but the threshers and the gray reef sharks. They're known to come to the reefs and to spend time in certain areas for a purpose, and that is to be cleaned. Actually, if you look in detail on this picture of the thresher shark, that little spot there next to the lower tail is a cleaner wrasse, because that is a thresher shark that was actually being cleaned. So these little cleaner wrasses are joining the sharks that either stop or swim in very slow circles around a specific area, and then they clean them of skin parasites, stuff from their gills, or even cleaning their teeth. Yeah, so this is the idea. Again, I'll show you two examples what this can look like. Left-hand side, I'm using my cursor, I didn't put any other markers in. Left-hand side, this little ledge here, you see the cursor, that is a cleaning station in the north of Small Brother, that in the right conditions we can dive. It's about 37, 38 meters deep. And what you see here is two gray reef sharks. This one stopped against the current, has its mouth open and a cleaner wrasse cleaning its teeth. And the second one is lining up to do exactly the same thing. And on the right side, this is Big Brother Island. And what you see in the corner is the coral mounds on the southeast plateau of Big Brother Island. Two threshers. The threshers are generally not stopping to be cleaned. They just swim very slow circles of figures of 8 around these mounds. And again, allow the cleaner wrasse, to join them to clean them. So if we behave the wrong way there, then this will never happen. So that means if we sit on top of the cleaning station, hover on top of it, or hover all around it, we're going to block basically these sharks from coming in there. Or if we see this kind of activity happening and we go towards it and go too close, they will leave and potentially not come back and miss out on this cleaning service, or they simply come back when we're gone. And that means we're losing the chance of seeing something actually quite special. Yeah, it's a really nice sight if you get to see that. And especially if you look at these threshers, more than one of them, that is really, really beautiful. And they're really extremely elegant when they just slowly circle around you there against the blue water. So this is the kind of disturbances that we should try to avoid, basically encouraging these sharks to get to do what they need to do and what they want to do, and to be able basically to do that and continue with what they're doing without us making it impossible by harassing them or disturbing them. Yeah, so that would be the general things for what I would call these normal sharks. And as mentioned, there is specific things and extra things to be said when we're talking about diving with the open ocean sharks, most namely with oceanic white tips and also to a certain degree the silkies. Now, why is that the case? Why are they different? The difference is very clearly in their behavior. I mentioned it very shortly before. Oceanics and silkies are very, very self-confident oceanic predators, and they are known to be very curious and inquisitive. And this is exactly the behavior that they show towards divers. It is the behavior that makes them successful open ocean predators, because the open ocean is a very difficult environment to survive. So they cannot really afford to let any potential food source just drift by. Yeah, so they're investigating almost anything. They're approaching, unfortunately, also fishing activities. They approach diving activities, the vibrations, so the sounds, the smells of what we do, that all can attract them. They hang around, and that means they will also encounter divers in the water. And unlike other sharks, they're not timid, not at all. So this actually can lead to very, very close encounters, which is awesome. But of course, it's still a very close encounter with a wild predator. So certain precautions, certain guidelines need to be followed to keep this safe. Now, I'm still actually the first defender of saying that these sharks per se are not dangerous. They're not interested in harming us in any way. But again, it is a large and very capable large predator. So of course, potentially there could be dangerous situations with them. Most of them start because of the behavior of the humans involved. So there are certain things that you need to know and that you need to be prepared for to try to keep this safe. Because of course, it's also very, very clear, if anything goes wrong in a close encounter with a shark like this, it will go wrong for the human involved and not for the shark. In the big picture, it goes terribly wrong for sharks, of course, but that's not really what we're talking about today. So the guidelines that I want to talk about can actually all be pretty much summed up under one headline, which might sound a bit weird to you, but it does make perfect sense. And that is that you have to avoid behaving like potential prey for that shark. What does that mean? The typical prey for a shark like this is anything that is in trouble of some sort, sick, injured, old, weak for whatever reason. A lot of these animals, and it could be pretty much anything, turtles, other sharks, rays, bony fish, pretty much anything, even seabirds, a lot of these animals are flopping around on the surface uncontrolled. Yeah, so quick and erratic movements send signals to sharks like this that sort of indicate there's potentially easy prey available. Yeah, so this is, for example, something you want to avoid. So this whole thing starts, avoiding to behave like potential prey starts with very clearly staying calm when sharks like this are around. You are being approached by a very self-confident predator. So your response to this needs to be that you at least appear self-confident as well. So as I just said, no erratic movements with your hands, with your fins, just stay calm and appear confident. Yeah, it's a totally different interaction instead of flopping around, or even worse, turning around and kicking away from that shark as quickly as you can. Yeah, running away from a predator will trigger sort of a chasing response that is very, very natural. Yeah, not only in sharks, but in any other predator, including our domestic dog, if you throw a ball away for them or something like this. So that is very, very similar. The next point is then the positioning in the water. It's a good idea to take a vertical position in the water column when you're around oceanics or silkies. Very simple reason. From this vertical position in the water, you can actually turn and have a look around you and see what's going on with only very minimal fin movements. You just pivot a little bit with your fins and you have the chance to turn and to basically check where the sharks are going, because it is really important to keep your eyes on them. And if there's one shark around, there may be more than one, not because they're social, but they're attracted by the same things. As I just said, sounds, smells, activities. So you need to keep track of the sharks around you. Otherwise, again, classic predator behavior, they will approach you from the blind spot, because something that doesn't see them also doesn't do anything to them. So then they're much more comfortable coming even closer to you. So keep an eye on them without moving too much. If you're in the classic horizontal shrimp position and the shark comes from behind and above you, for you to turn and keep track involves a lot more movement, maybe also a little bit depending on your experience level, but the vertical position makes that a lot easier. Yeah, so that's a good position to be in. And then especially with the oceanics, they might be very, very shallow. They're finding a lot of their food, as I just described, flopping around on or near the surface. So that's their comfort zone. That's where they're very persistent in approaching, probing, and investigating objects. So that means for you, limit your time on or near the surface. It's also one of the main reasons why it's not allowed to snorkel or swim in any of the areas where oceanics might be around. Yeah, so limit your time on or near the surface. You jump in, drop down to 5 meters as quickly as possible, no matter if you're jumping off the back of a liveaboard or if you're rolling off a Zodiac. And as a general rule of thumb, the deeper you are, the less likely very close approaches of these sharks actually are. And I can extend that to another point. The closer to the reef you are, that counts as well. It's not that the oceanics are never coming to the reef, but generally they're most comfortable approaching objects, including divers, in the shallows, in the blue. This can be underneath the liveaboards or further out in the blue, away from the reef. Yeah, so the depth is an issue, and staying close to the reef is also a potential way to avoid them. Because really, if you're jumping in the water and there's oceanics around, you need to be prepared, and you should be fairly sure that you can handle potentially very, very close encounters. And if you look at that shark on the picture, you can see that he's extremely close to the camera because there's this white membrane that flicked up over the eye. This is the so-called nictid heading membrane. It's a protective membrane that they only put up if they're very close to an object that might quickly move towards them and could potentially damage the eye. So this is super close, and this shark felt the need to close it. That was the closeness to the wide angle lens, actually. Yeah, but that is like a 2-meter animal that is pretty much in touching distance from you. So this is, it can be quite challenging if it happens the first time. But as I said, thankfully, it's also quite easy to avoid. Stay close to the reef, go a bit deeper, and this is very unlikely to happen. If you are prepared, if you've done it before, a lot of people also enjoy that very, very quickly, because generally these sharks, they're quite relaxed. Yes, they're curious, but that's normally the end of this. Yeah, so if you stay calm, then normally there is no issues. And I'm sort of living proof. I've been seeking out these sharks over literally thousands of dives and never really had a tricky situation with them. So I'm not saying that will never happen. As I said, they're wild animals. They're never going to be 100% predictable. Looking at everything and all the experience, I would still definitely say that diving with these sharks, if done correctly, and if you stick to the behavioral guidelines, then that's safe. And of course, I just gave, I said, the broad strokes for all this. If you go on a liveaboard and there's the potential to see oceanic white tips, then the guides should and mostly will give you much more detailed briefings that are also dealing with how to deal with Zodiac interactions, with a lot of the other practicalities that come actually with a diving operation around animals like this. Yeah, so this is something that they're all trained to do, that they all had seminars about. So hopefully they're all applying the knowledge that they were given so that these dives and the divers can stay safe with these sharks. Yeah, so this is the idea. But there's the different things depending on which shark you're meeting. You need to be prepared, and you should know what the do's and don'ts are and what the guidelines are. Yeah, so this is just roughly what I would recommend. So then I go back to Mark. Did that answer most of the questions that came in that you mentioned, or is there anything else that I should talk about?
No, I've got a couple more questions for you, if that's okay. Yeah, sure. So Paul Bryden wants to know if it's worth visiting south. He's been everywhere else, but is there any shark encounters further south? So Rockies, Sabergarden, around there.
Well, Rocky Sabergard is pretty much the same sort of like height, just a little bit further offshore from St. John's. So definitely May, June, the time that we have like the chance for larger pelagics in St. John's as well, because mainly of water temperatures, would also be a good time to visit Rocky and Sabergard. There's a good chance in that season down there also for encounters with oceanic mantas, not sharks per se, but same family, and obviously also an attraction point. And also for the last few years, actually, Rocky and Sabergard had quite a lot of oceanic sightings in the right season, which was October, November. So on both of these seasons, I would definitely say yes. So there's also the potential for big stuff. And also, to be frank, it's also amazing reef quality down there. It's one of the least busy areas, actually, for whatever reason. There's a lot of sort of like nationalities that I don't know are not really aware, or it has never been really properly promoted. I always loved going down there because I never really saw more than 3 or 4 boats there, even in the main season. Near Rocky Island, beautiful coral walls, pretty much like the Brothers, maybe not entirely as overgrown, but definitely very similar to it. And when it comes to coral garden quality, Zavagat actually is one of my favorites. So even without the large pelagics, which you obviously cannot guarantee ever, I would say it's definitely worth going, yes.
Okay, next question from Martin L. Are any of the sharks you mentioned in that migrating, which presumably is most of them into some form or another, but is there any actual evidence?
Not really. I mean, obviously the Red Sea is a bit of a special sea when it comes to that, quite narrow, very long, and then this very narrow gap at the south. So, I mean, for the whale sharks, I would say yes. Although the research into this has just started, to be honest, that just do all the ID catalogs and trying to follow individuals around, which I'll explain. I mean, the general method I'll explain here in the last chapter. For the oceanics, actually, I've only had one shark that actually went from Egypt to Sudan so far. And generally in the south of Saudi Arabia and in Sudan, there's not really oceanic white-tip shark sightings. So I wouldn't really call it migrating. I would say maybe some seasonal movements, but I would say most of the populations of sharks that we have here are probably staying roughly in the same area. And if we're talking Egypt, that would be northern central Red Sea. As I said, whale sharks might be a bit different, oceanic mantas might be a bit different, but the sharks that I mainly mentioned now, it doesn't look like it, but there's a lot of information missing, because what we're not doing here in Egypt yet, and that what only just started in actually Saudi Arabia, is the tagging of sharks, the satellite tagging, and that should give us more information about this. For now, I would say there's not really much evidence for proper migrations going on actually in the Red Sea.
Okay, cool, excellent. So next question, do any of the species prefer strong currents or lack of currents?
Yeah, I mean, with the grey reef sharks, I would definitely say strong currents are preferred. I mean, they're actually using the day to rest along the reef, but they're not stopping to rest like the white tips. So actually the white tip reef sharks. So for the grey reef sharks, just cruising in current actually is very easy for them, because obviously it's very energy efficient. They're not really using any energy, and it gives them the chance to properly ventilate their gills without really working for it, just hanging in the current basically. For the others, it doesn't seem to make a big difference. There doesn't really seem to be like current lovers. Again, hammerheads, they maybe have a slight preference for like sort of split points if the current is strong, because they generally want to hang out in the same area as a reference point, which is close to their feeding grounds at night. So let's say these coral mounds, like again, Daedalus, which is probably why they're there. So there might be a slight preference for current, but I wouldn't say for strong current. A bit of movement, I think, is better for them. For the rest of them, I mean, it's difficult to tell, because generally we don't really have much options to observe anything in strong current, because we're useless in it. So then we're just drifting along, whereas the sharks have completely different options. So exact preference there is difficult for us to judge, I would say.
Cool, excellent. Maya prefers diving in rash guard and shorts, but is it better to wear a full diving suit when diving with sharks?
I would say no. I mean, I can give you one very drastic example. I did my first baited, feeding dive just a couple of weeks ago in the Bahamas, and that involved large tiger sharks. And the guys that were responsible to organize the whole thing, they were diving in board shorts and not even rash vests. So apparently there's no issues, even with tiger sharks that are coming in for a meal, or at least for a bit of chum. In that case, it wasn't really properly feeding them, to be honest. And also here in Egypt, I don't really see any issues. I personally prefer to wear like something long, like rash guard wise, not because of the sharks, but because there might be stinging plankton around. I mean, jellyfish in the Red Sea don't sting, but there's other particles in the plankton that might sting. So that's a matter of comfort. But for the sharks, it's absolutely your choice. Whatever you prefer to wear should not be an issue and should not make a difference.
Okay, one of our slightly dodgier customers wants to know, are they interested in certain colors more than others?
There's these rumors that have been flying around, the so-called yum yellow, for fins, for example. From personal experience and also from what we know about at least some like vision details on sharks, color is not really a major trigger. A bigger trigger would be contrast, potentially. So if it's, let's say, yellow or white fins with black bars, in certain situations, which is in general mainly baited situations, feeding situations, that they might be more interested. But if I look at all the experiences with these highly interactive oceanic white tips, it's really not about the color of the fins, it's about how much the fins are moving. So if you have frantically kicking fins, they can be black, blue, green, yellow, and the sharks will be interested. And if these fins are not moving, they will ignore them no matter what color they are. So I would say generally the people can relax about this one. Again, it might be a different situation. You go on a beta dive with certain species where they recommend to lower the contrast that you're wearing. So it depends on the kind of dive and where you are. But for our natural encounter dives here in Egypt, I would say it doesn't make a difference.
Okay, I'll ask you one more question because we've got quite a few more, but I know you've got quite a lot more to carry on with. So Daniel wants to know what you should do when dive guides or crew on your boat start feeding sharks, or just natural waste coming through from the kitchen goes into the water.
First of all, feeding sharks, I mean, I would then tell them that you know that this is illegal and that it's actually also endangering people that might be in the water at the time. And they should all know this, because again, also all the crews have been trained and are trained. And when it comes to the organic waste, I mean, that there's a little bit of sort of like particles coming out with the kitchen drain that cannot be helped, but also all the liveaboards actually have very, very clear instructions and rules that organic waste is not just basically washed out or thrown over the side during the day, or while people are in the water, or while they're at the reefs. So all the people on board should know that this is illegal. And if you notice this, even if you don't want to talk to them directly, there might be language issues, go to your guide. Yeah, make them aware of it, and they should stop this immediately, because there's always the threat, even if other people see it, that don't just question them, they will report them, and then the fines will be quite drastic. Organic waste can be basically discarded on the boats, but there's special rules about it in terms of it has to happen basically in the night. And it has to be far away from the reefs in deep water. First of all, it's partially about the sharks, but it's obviously also partially, even if it's natural stuff, if you throw this out over a coral reef, it will clog corals because it ends up on them. So there's rules about this one for the protection of the environment in general, and to not actively feed sharks, especially close to reefs, close to dive sites, and close to the activity of divers.
Okay, we have got more questions, but I'm going to let you crack on, but we will try and get back to the other questions later on, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, sure. So final chapter. Oh, we're getting a bit late, but okay, fine. Right, so a few more things about the ideas, the motivation behind the Red Sea Sharks Trust, and what I'm actually doing here when I'm out there on the boats, and not only out on the boats. I mentioned in the beginning, my starting point, obviously, okay, I'm by training a biologist. My starting point was actually really meeting the Oceanics after I had started to work here as a guide. Why the Oceanics? Well, with the eyes of the biologist, there's actually a few obvious things that are sticking out. Let's start to go back to what I just said about diving with them, their behavior. They're in shallow water, they're not afraid of people, it's the opposite. They're interested in basically exploring or investigating people and their activity. So you see them close, that's one thing. And then, paired with these conspicuous markings on all their fin tips, for a biologist that screams one very particular research technique, which is photo identification. So when I started seeing them in October 2004, 4, 5, 6 around, even underwater, you start noticing how different they look. And then again, that means you should be able to tell them apart, potentially even long term. So I started identifying these oceanics via these actually very individually different color markings. The main fin that I'm using is the first dorsal fin. It's the largest one. It's a fin that is not moving, so you get it at a good angle if that shark is just passing by. And over the years, actually, I got the confirmation that this is also one of the most stable markings that they have. Yeah, because the study's been ongoing now, going into year number 17. And I've had sharks that I haven't seen for years, and I never had a problem recognizing them as the same shark. because of the stability and the uniqueness of the markings. So as a result, there's now a huge database, the biggest one for the species actually in the world, that is comprised of about 45,000 individual images, and that led to the identification of more than 1,000 different individuals over time. I can show you just examples how different, or maybe for you also how similar the markings look. I've obviously been staring at these kind of markings for the last 17 years. For me, that's very, very obvious differences. And the good thing is humans are very good at visual pattern recognition because there is no software that does the matching for me. It's still less time consuming than you might think now, because again, with a certain familiarity with what you're looking for, you can actually fairly quickly find out if you know a shark or if it's in the catalog, even if this catalog is now quite large. So this is a set of fins from the same place, from Brother Islands, all taken in 2018. So this is just an excerpt of the sharks that were around at this point in time. And of course, photo identification is good in many ways. It allows you to individually identify and then therefore count animals. It's non-invasive, which is a good thing. You just take a photograph. And that also means you don't actually have to be a scientist to contribute to a study like this. So this is something that I think today is now fashionably called citizen science. Any diver in the water with a camera can help. The only thing that is needed to get some more information, not only the individual identification out of this, would be the place and the time that the picture was taken, so date and dive site. And then you actually can collect a lot more information. You will get residency patterns, you will get movement and migration paths for this oceanic predators, which otherwise you could only get with really, really expensive and quite sophisticated satellite technology. Yeah, so this has been actually a very, very sort of satisfying way to study them. I know that there's gaps in the information, but it still gives us access to more information that was ever available before on this scale. I'm going to give you another two quick examples with like sort of tracks of individuals, of course not proper tracks, but just information on their sighting history. This is a rather typical one here, this map. First sighting of this female oceanic, September 2017 at the Brothers. Then the year after, and actually in the same year, a month later, or the 2 months after, she had moved to Elphinstone. That's a distance of about 110 kilometers. And then the year after, she was back in Elphinstone. And then another year later, so across then 3 years, she moved further south to Daedalus. Again, between Elphinstone and Daedalus is about 110 kilometers. So this is very typical. She's covering all the hotspots, close to deep water, in the right season that I mentioned before. So a very, very typical track of all the individuals that are recited over a number of years. And then there's also the atypical ones, and I'll show you one of those. That's one of my personal favorites. I've known her now for 10 years. That's one of the sharks that I have sighted on a number of occasions over these years. So if you look at this map, look at where she's seen. That's much further south. Actually, most of her sightings over these 10 years are coming from the St. John's Plateau. Only one a little bit further north, which is still quite far south for and away from the hotspots. And then also the times that she's seen, the months, is unusual. That's out of season actually for the hotspots. So April, May, very commonly. Yeah, that is actually the same place on the St. John's Plateau, in the very south of the St. John's Plateau, where she's seen. Now, why is she so special? She's not only special because of when and where she's sighted, actually, and actually the time that she's been showing up. Now, 10 years or 11 years is a long period of time. She's also unusually large, actually. This is a picture of her, and I don't know how many of you have met oceanics, but she probably looks strange to you in terms of proportion, and that would be actually the right sort of impression. Because if you look at her, her biggest girth is sort of around the head area where the gills are, sort of here in this area. And then she tapers off. I would give her probably really close to 3 meters, and she is probably the largest oceanics that I've seen. If I've seen other oceanics her size, it was maximum 1 time, and then I've never seen them again. So she keeps coming back and appearing in the same place. Obviously, last time, May 2019, I was thrilled to see her because I hadn't seen her in 5 years. So that was really, really nice. But her proportions are unusual, and you will see that much clearer if I show you what the typical young adult oceanic that makes up most of our sightings actually looks like in proportion, which would be this. Yeah, so here you see that first of all, very slender, but the head actually just, here she gains in girth, and the biggest girth is sort of between the pectoral fin and the dorsal fin, so in a completely different place than her. These guys have a maximum of maybe around the 2 meter mark, maybe 220 if they're big. And as I said, she is somewhere between 2.5 to 3 meters long, because I never really properly measured her, but just as a visual impression. So I don't know if that's an age thing, if that's some people in a paper talked about 2 subspecies, but she definitely has a very different sort of like distribution pattern from the majority of the population, wherever that came from. So there's some interesting things that came out over time. And of course, I'm sure there's a lot more to come. It's a massive database. There's a lot more information in there. And in the moment, I'm actually starting to cooperate and talk to researchers on the Saudi Arabian side. And hopefully I will get some more information out of there with the help of some more people that are a little bit better at statistics than I am. But yeah, there's a massive database, lots of information that I collected about the oceanics. And since that went quite well, and then I found out that there's really not much else happening on this side of the Red Sea with the shark research, I took on some additional projects. I have now another photo ID catalog for gray reef sharks. That is slowly growing, and also for silky sharks. That's the smallest one, but again, slowly growing. The focus is definitely on the oceanic still, but even with these guys, all these photo ID things are possible. And then since 2011, I'm also doing a general shark monitoring program, which actually includes all the shark species and as many details about the sightings that divers have of them over time. This is the part where everybody can help. With photographs, underwater images, and as I said, as long as date and place are known, this is all really, really helpful. So this is basically the research side, and yeah, Red Sea Sharks is the umbrella organization for this. But if you look at the tagline there underneath the name, there's 2 other major words in there. One of them, of course, the first one is conservation, and the other one is education. So obviously, sharks are seriously in need of more protective measures. We have been depleting them massively over the last few decades. But to really argue the protection of any species, 2 things are necessary. First of all, you need information, you need numbers. If you want to argue with lawmakers, or in this case, maybe fisheries representatives, you need to prove that something has happened, that there's a bad situation. And if you don't have the numbers, that is very difficult. Getting numbers for shark populations is very tricky. We don't have a baseline. We don't know where we started before industrial fishing started. And even today, numbers are difficult to get to because, yeah, these sharks are constantly submerged, highly mobile. A lot of them can be highly migratory. So to really get proper estimates and trends is very, very difficult. So anything, any information collected in whichever way, if this is now with sophisticated methods or with something as simple as underwater pictures, can be helpful for that and can give you like information in your hand that you can use. And of course, the other thing is, if you want to protect anything, you need people that are interested in protecting it. And of course, sharks have a massive image problem. And to motivate people to protect something that they're even irrationally afraid of is very, very tricky as well. So this is where education comes into play. I'm mainly looking at this from the point of educating divers or raising awareness among divers. Now, some of you might say, well, you're preaching to the choir. Maybe to a certain degree, but on the other hand, this is the people that need this information to carry this out to other people, the people that don't have the privilege of meeting these animals underwater. Maybe because they cannot or because they don't want to, doesn't really matter. So for me, divers are actually perfect ambassadors to get this information to a larger public. And that's why I think the divers that come into liveaboards, when they're actually looking for sharks, this is a very good moment to actually give them all the information that they need so that they can spread the word. Yeah, so this is the idea. So this is basically the idea of Red Sea Sharks, collecting as much information as I can with the liveaboards as a platform, and to use this also as a platform for awareness and educational programs. And all of this is to help actually to push shark conservation. That's the main idea. And of course, the liveaboards, we do normal trips. We do trips, I'm guiding in the north sometimes. But of course, I try to focus on the areas where I can see sharks, where I can collect information on sharks. And then, of course, I also have people that are most likely open to listen to some information about sharks. So this is for these dedicated shark weeks that I'm doing, that I have been doing now for the last, I think, 14 or 15 years. This is the idea. And what I've told you about today is a bit of a combination and a bit of a summary of the different subjects that I'm talking about. One of the biggest subjects normally on a liveaboard in a week like this is shark conservation. So there's obviously a whole lot to talk about, and as I said, a lot of information to give to people so that they can spread the word about this one and what can be done actually. So yeah, very shortly before we come to the end. So as I mentioned, I'm working on a new vessel now that I'm very excited about. So I have a new platform. I'm involved in managing the boat and a bit of marketing the boat as well, in hosting trips, in guiding trips, and obviously the dedicated shark weeks will be happening on this boat as well. So just a few pictures, maybe as a bit of a teaser and maybe as a bit of a motivation to join me on board. The boat is called Scuba Scene. She's 43 meters long, 9 meters wide. It's a steel hull, so she's very stable. She's very comfortable. She's beautifully laid out. And most importantly, as far as I'm concerned, is that the diving activities are supported well. So that spacious dive deck, everything can be stored safely. Of course, nitrox, all that is on the boat, all that stuff. And then also we upgraded the large speedboats that we have, so we can comfortably carry to quite a large range divers with their equipment. We have a comfortable ladder that is in place, so also getting out of the water can be done efficiently and very easily, which again helps very much when we're talking about oceanics in play and wanting that people limit their time on the surface. The equipment is safe on the Zodiac, so that is obviously very important for everything diving related. And also, of course, for me, talking about educational and awareness programs and presentations, we have a super spacious salon which actually doesn't have only one screen that you see there, but on the other side there's a second large screen. So wherever you are in the salon, you can very comfortably actually follow the presentations and the information that is given. So this is the new boat. There's of course a lot more details available for those that are interested. This is the website. There's another couple more interesting links that we can obviously spread around. So this is the new idea. And this is also the boat that Mark and Oyster Diving and myself have planned a couple of concrete trips already now for the near future. Well, as near as we can, because obviously we're all waiting for things to normalize and for traveling to open. And yeah, this is my introduction of the boat. I'm excited to work on her, and yeah, hopefully you're going to join me there at some point. And basically with this, I'm going to give it back to Mark. I think he wants to mention a few more details about the trips that I planned. And then I guess there's a few more questions. So I'm going to leave you with this screen for some more links, which we can pass on as well. And then, yeah, for now, I'll give it back to Mark.
Cool. Thank you, Elke. That was fascinating. So we'll do a few more questions in a minute. I think we're having one or two people dropping off now just because they've got young children. So before any of the youngsters do disappear off, one of the things that we've been talking to Elke about, which would be fascinating to do if we can, is doing a sort of family orientated liveaboard down in the Red Sea. So we wouldn't be able to go to brothers or dayless just because of the experience levels that you need as a diver, but we can do some of the more pristine reefs. And Elke can do more talk about sharks and shark conservation with things on that as well. So if you are interested in doing that, so we're potentially looking at possibly May or October next year, please drop me an email to info@oysterdiving.com, or you can just go to our website and you'll find our contact details there, which is just oysterdiving.com. We're also looking at doing a group trip as well. So for people who don't know Oyster, we do kind of pretty much everything. So we're a dive school, but we're also a fully bonded travel agent and tour operator as well. So we're really excited to be getting involved with Elke. And as I say, we've been doing Red Sea shark trips with her for 10 years plus probably now. So we're going to be doing more of them as well. So if you want to join us for one of our trips, it's whether you're a couple, single person, it doesn't really matter. To do some of the itineraries, you obviously need to be slightly more experienced than others. So if you want to do the Brothers Daedalus, normally it's Elke, are you 50 dives on your new boat, or are you 35?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of operators are down to 30. We would prefer actually 50 for the marine parks, and advanced open water. Ideally, if you want to make the most of it, especially maybe for threshers with a deep specialty. And of course, nitrox can help as well, extending bottom times. Of course, the specialities and advanced course can also be done on board. I mean, I don't know, with trips with you, you bring instructors normally anyway, so this can either come from your side or from the guides that are on board, but this can be arranged. But yeah, a minimum of 50 dives would be preferable, actually. If people are super comfortable and they're confident, I'm not saying having less than 50 dives will keep them from coming on this trip, but then it might be a steep learning curve because it can be quite difficult surface conditions. We might ask for negative entry, so there might be some currents. So generally for this kind of trip, I would say minimum of 50 dives would be a good idea.
But I mean, there are other itineraries that people can enjoy.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, if we do the northern trips or even deep south, then there's a lot more relaxed diving. There's quite a few more trips off the back of the boat. So definitely these trips are open for different experience levels and different numbers of dives. We take them happily. I mean, 30 dives is absolutely fine for trips like this. And even still there on trips like this, you can also still do training on the boat if you want to continue with it. So all of that is definitely possible.
For anyone who's never had the privilege of diving with Elke, her nickname whenever we're on board is the Shark Lady. I won't do what the underwater hand signals are, but I mean, I've probably done it at least half a dozen times myself, and of all the trips I've done around the world, I've been very privileged to do. This is still absolutely one of my favourite. There's nothing really that can make you feel more alive and get the adrenaline going, and so fascinating as when you're diving with oceanics in particular, in my case, is what I love.
I agree.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah, and it just makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. But I can honestly say, I mean, I've obviously haven't done it as long as you and as frequent as you, but I've never once felt threatened by them as well. So you do a couple of the questions we've been getting, and which I don't think we're going to get time to answer, is, you know, about some of the accidents that have happened, but these are very few and far between, and there's normally a fairly logical explanation for those as well. So I don't know if you maybe want to touch on that later on, but so yeah, I've put a link on the chat as well, which has got a link on our website to Elke's boat, which is Scuba Scene. It would be lovely to have you on board, either on one of our oyster diving trips, but we can obviously also book you on. We've got the full itinerary and availability for the boat as well. So if you want to have a small group of you and you think, well, we can only do this particular time, we can happily book that for you as well. Okay, so do you have time for a couple more questions? There was a few more.
I don't mind. I'm available. I have no issues. I have no other plans.
Yes, not go to the pub, can you? So, okay, one of the questions, which I quite like this question, what's the most beautiful shark encounter that you'll never forget?
Wow, that's a difficult one over all these years. Good Lord, that's a tricky one. I mean, as you just said, I mean, the Oceanics are still very, very special to me. And of course, I have been in situations with them where there was really not many other people around. There were 5, 6, 7 of them, really self-confidently. And then, you know, just, yeah, it's so special because they're pretty much, they confront you as if you're a nobody, whereas everything else runs away from you underwater. And I still have this feeling, and this is pretty much every year, when the season starts, and we haven't seen much of them throughout most of the year, and then this first like silhouette appears like from the blue and just keeps coming towards you, and that is still like breathtaking, actually. Just, yeah, I find them stunningly beautiful still. I find them very elegant, and yeah, that has never really gone away after all these years as well. So it's difficult to single out a certain encounter. I of course had very close encounters, like this particular one that I mentioned, this really large female. She's super chilled. This is a shark that I also dive with at night, which I think for a lot of people is a bit of a no-go, oceanics at night. But yeah, especially with her, I've actually absolutely no issues with her. And I've had quite a few people that dive with her in the night and absolutely loved it. That is a special thrill as well, just in the darkness, and then they appear and then they glide by as calmly as they would during the day. But
just
yeah,
to put that into context as well, when I spoke to Elke on the phone last week, she was in the Maldives, and she goes, I said, how's your day been? Yeah, I've just got out of the water. Yeah, just been diving with tiger sharks. So there's me looking out the window and he's chucking it down with rain. Oh no.
Yeah, that was very lucky. I didn't think that was going to happen, obviously, because of the situation. So just like, I think about 2 weeks before the trip started, all of a sudden I heard, no, you're going. I was like, oh, really? I am? And I actually couldn't believe it. No, that was awesome. That was
yeah.
cool.
I'm sure people are actually interested in the current situation in Egypt now. So the UK government is talking about well, it was the 12th of April originally, now looks potentially more like the 5th of April, where they're going to talk about international travel. I think, Elke, you've been saying that there's been very few cases on the Red Sea Riviera, as I would call it. So not talking about Cairo and places like that, but
Well,
it could be one
look,
of the first places to reopen.
Whatever I can say is purely anecdotal. I'm not working in a hospital. I have no access to any official numbers. What, of course, is very obvious that the amount of testing is very, very small. Generally, I mean, I have talked to doctors here as well that have seen a couple of positive cases that did test people, and they generally reported that the symptoms were quite minor. But there's of course some rumors flying around, but generally I don't think that here in these Red Sea, on these tourist areas, there was any signs of the health system being overwhelmed. And in other places, as you said, it's difficult. Generally, there's a lot of question marks behind the numbers that are published here from Egypt, and nobody apparently really knows what's happening. I can say from the personal also life experience here in Hurghada, it seems quite relaxed. Of course, we have rules about mask using and social distancing that they try to enforce also with fines. And of course, I mean, apparently it has worked quite well. I mean, I had to test, of course, for going to the Maldives and coming back, and I didn't seem to have caught it. So, I mean, and I don't know actually anybody personally here in Hurghada that has. As I said, it's anecdotal, but it doesn't sound like a massive issue here from what we know. This is, as I said, it's very personal, it's very anecdotal, and might not reflect the real situation, but this is the impression that we're getting here, living here. So
yeah, I mean, what most airlines are doing now anyway, you're kind of almost in a no lose situation at the moment. So if you end up booking a flight and a boat space, and because we're not able to travel, we can completely reschedule that as well. Most airlines will give you a refund as well, and that's what we're planning on doing as well, if people just can't find any other time to reschedule.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. It's all a bit uncertain, and everybody's still waiting and stuff, and everybody tries to make it as easy as possible. Like also what we try, people are interested, taking a booking first, and then we wait with deposits, and still things look as if they're really, picking up and are opening up. So it's, everybody does what they can to try to get through this. And of course it has been taken so much longer than I ever thought it would. And hopefully we're getting to the end of it. But at least in the UK, you seem to be racing ahead with vaccinations, unlike a lot of other countries. So yeah, that makes
something right.
hopeful.
Cool.
In Germany, total chaos. Actually, I just heard that my sister actually will get her vaccination before my 77-year-old father that has a heart problem. I don't know how that ever happened. She doesn't even know how it happened, but it's unreal what's going on there. I don't know. No, very strange.
One question here is quite a nice question. Is they're talking about whale sharks specifically, but I guess it could work for any shark. Are you sharing or requesting data from any other parties for tracking purposes?
Yeah, I mean, I just basically had now since I had some time during the what's not working thingy throughout the last year, I actually shared all my manta and whale shark data with the guys working in Saudi Arabia, because they're creating pretty much like a wild book here for the Red Sea, and it's part of the global sighting program. So this is obviously the data that I'm sharing. We're probably also going to cooperate on some other stuff over there. And for other shark species here for Egypt, where in the moment there is no research going on, I'm still happy to collect information. I mean, storage capacity is cheap. And even if I'm not using it in the moment, I'm quite happy to store the data with the information of where and when, of course, with the pictures, so that even if in the future somebody is actually interested in starting a research, that there's some actually historic data that they can use. So I'm pretty much open with Red Sea sharks to collect any kind of underwater sort of images of sharks that can potentially be identified. And of course, if people are not sure if they are or not, I mean, rather send me the pictures, and if they're then not really suitable, then that's fine, but then I can at least keep track of stuff that is suitable. and can make it available to other people for future research if that's happening. So all of this, I'm very happy to do.
Hopefully we haven't lost all of our younger members of the audience. So a nice question here from Katia is, what advice would you give to a young enthusiastic who's 13 years old and wants to study marine biology and specialize in sharks? What did you do? I mean, what did you do 5 years ago, Elke?
Well, yeah. Well, I never really took a direct path. I mean, I had a couple of, I don't know, I wouldn't say dense. I mean, I never planned on focusing on sharks, but obviously I was lucky enough to have the encouragement also from my family to say, do and study what you're interested in, what you're passionate about. Because I mean, all these plans of like that you try to find something that will give you a good living or give you a good job, by the time you finish studying, this whole structure will have changed and exactly your job is not needed anymore. So go for what you're passionate about, then you have the best chance of being good at it. And then of course, it also doesn't have to be about the money, as long as you can make a living. I mean, if you think about what I'm doing now, a dive guide. I have a PhD, but I'm a dive guide. But again, it pays my bills and it allows me to do what I really want to do. And of course, I still feel privileged that I can put the two interests or hobbies together, biology and diving. So in the end of the day, if you're really passionate about something, no matter what happens, but you're probably going to find a way to make this work. If that's now the direct path of marine biology or of diving, or if you go through journalism and writing books, or if you're just being affiliated with researchers, you're going to figure this out. And also studying biology, I can only say, it's so diverse that you might actually, when you start studying, find something that you find more interesting. I wanted to study marine biology and ended up with studying animal behavior and communication, which I then used for marine mammals. So there's so many different ways of getting where you want to go. Just be open for this, and yeah, go for it. If that's what you want to do, go for it.
Do you have any information on the breeding in the Red Sea, you know, where the breeding takes place, or where they're born, or anything like that?
Again, this is one of the very one of the very interesting questions that we don't know for a lot of shark species all around the world, and that includes the Red Sea. Now we have ideas for some of them. I mentioned when the question came, the black debris sharks, shallow nursery grounds and sort of like lagoons and shallow reef tops. But for the oceanic sharks, I mean, this is still very much unknown, even for iconic species like great whites or whale sharks. And of course, with oceanics, we're not much further. I am quite sure that they're breeding in this area because of the simple fact that we see pretty much all age and sex classes where we're diving. We don't see the newborns. Probably the youngest oceanic that I came across was probably around about 2.5, 3 years old, if you look at the growth rates, which makes sense as well. Newborn sharks, especially predatory sharks, should not hang around with the adults. So again, some sharks do shallow nursery grounds, so the newborns are so shallow that the big ones cannot maneuver there. But of course, for an oceanic shark, that's not really an option. So one of the speculations is that in sharks like this, the separation happens via the depth, that maybe the newborns spend their time much deeper than the adults to avoid being eaten by them. And that also would explain why we don't see them, not in the first 2, maybe 3 years. But where exactly that happens, I don't know. I mean, in an ocean or in a sea like the Red Sea, which generally stays reasonably same temperatures, I mean, not exactly the same, of course, but in terms of the thermoregulation, there might not even be a proper mating and breeding season. There might be 1 or 2 peaks of the mating. So I've seen pregnant oceanics, but not enough of them to really sort of be able to tell when exactly they might be giving birth. So, and then of course you see them and then you don't see them for a long time. So I don't know.
Okay. Karen wants to know what the life expectancy is for an oceanic.
Oceanic, I think the estimates in the moment are in the range of 35 to 40 years, which is pretty typical for like one of these sort of requiem sharks of that size. And of course, for other sharks like whale sharks, I think estimates in the more were at 120, 130 years. So much, much more. But yeah, generally for the sharks that we're looking at, sort of gray reef shark, maybe about 30 years, oceanic, sort of 35 to 40 years.
Okay. Tony says he's got a photo of an encounter with a white tip at Furry Shoals, and presumably there's quite a few people watching who've got photographs of oceanic white tips. Are you interested in having them, and if so, what should they do with them?
Well, if it's videos, it could be easier to send them via things like WeTransfer or something to upload them, because obviously, ideally, I get them the highest possible resolution, especially with videos. If I have to work with screenshots or something like this, then it's easier to see the markings. Anything like this, I'm very interested in. As I said, the only thing that I would need, actually, information-wise, is the date they were taken, the place they were taken, and ideally also the full name of the photographer. So this information goes. I'm not publishing the pictures, I'm using the contents basically of pictures and videos for the database, but then photographers can actually check on my website how many different oceanics and which ones were identified from their footage. So you can, pictures you can email to info@redseasharks.org or to elke@redseasharks.org. And as I said, if it's video files, then maybe upload them for free on WeTransfer, or if there's Dropbox folders that you send me an invitation for to the same email address, info@redseasharks or elke@redseasharks.org, all that can be arranged. You can contact me on Facebook and we can arrange for a transfer, anything like this, but I'd definitely be very interested in getting this information and using it for the database, yes.
Cool. Our dodgy customer is back again. There's been a story in today's news, which is actually very sad. We did drop a note on our Facebook page earlier today about it as well. And saying it's looking like the Maldives are looking to illegalize shark fishing again.
I saw this today. Oh
yeah,
God,
it's shocking.
Shocking.
I mean, as far as I've always found out recently, that sharks are worth more alive than they are dead these days. But is there anything that we can do as shark advocates to protect them? You know, do you know of any petitions yet or anything like that we can do?
I mean, I will share a petition. Actually, I just got the address sent again. I will share this tomorrow on Red Sea Sharks. That's for the European Union. When it comes to basically holiday destinations, I'm sure that also very soon, because this just came out today, that's very, very recent. So I would be surprised if there's not very soon a link so that you can actually actively send emails and messages to the Minister of Tourism in the Maldives to make it clear what your motivation is to visit the Maldives. Because in the end of the day, they're depending on tourism, which is why they became the second country in the world in 2014 to protect all their sharks and rays. So this step backwards, I don't understand. I don't know, I mean, who came up with this? Because in the end of the day, as you said, there's a general understanding in countries that have a thriving diving and snorkeling industry based on pelagic encounters, that these animals are worth so much more alive than dead, so much more. There's some numbers out for the Bahamas, for Palau, where they actually did proper studies, but even just from logic, I mean, I think the fins of a grey reef shark are worth to the fishermen, wherever you are, maybe about $10. Yeah, but thinking about that, a grey reef shark lives 30 years, is pretty much resident in the same place, and keeps attracting tourism and tourists for 30 years of its life if you protect it. That is not really rocket science to understand that this is so much more money than $10. That's ridiculous. Yeah, it is ridiculous. So I hope that, I mean, know that there's very active groups in the Maldives as well. So I would say give them the time to get organized. And again, if I hear something that there is links, then it's about really bombarding the government there and try to make them understand that if they allow the fishermen to kill these shark populations, they're going to lose a lot. They're going to lose a lot of tourists. And I don't think that the revenue of these dead sharks is going to make up for this.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Martin wants to know, is the white pattern on an Oceanic White tip on the left and the right sides of the dorsal fin exactly the same?
That is a very good question, and I have to say, unfortunately not.
It would be handy if it was, eh?
It would be awesome. I mean, that's why the idea of the Silkies is so much easier, because you can use the notch pattern. They don't have color, and obviously notch pattern doesn't matter if it's left or right. The color patterns, unfortunately, are not the same. So ideally, I get both sides of the same individual. That I try to do when I'm in the water myself. So if you see me frantically racing around an oceanic to try to get to the other side, this is what I will try to do. But of course, this can be a problem. I mean, if I get pictures sent and I have this animal maybe in my catalog on the left side and then I get the right side, I might not even be aware that I have this animal already until I'm in the lucky situation that I get a video that shows it from both sides. That's why I'm trying to actually collect all the markings. So even let's say on a video, when the shark passes by, I might get to see as the tail moves the other side of the tail. So from my other side picture, even if it's only the tail that I have, I might still allow me to put left and right together. So I try whatever I can to get them from both sides.
Okay. So shark related question. When do you tend to see the most mantas and whereabouts?
Manta season, I would say mostly. I mean, we had unusual years, but mostly this will be sort of like May, June time. And then we're talking about St. John's Plateau, including also then further out like Rocky Zabargat, if you're lucky, and also in Daedalus at this point, there can be quite a few mantas around. And funny enough, the mantas that we see here in Egypt are all oceanic mantas. I've never seen a reef manta, which is the more common manta in the Maldives, obviously. So then you tend to see oceanic mantas. But yeah, so I would say best chances, maybe April already, but May, June. And of course, the odd one might pass by at other times, but better chances at this time of year.
Okay. I don't know who this is from because it's anonymous, but other than sending in photos, are there any other ways we can help volunteer to help the Red Sea sharks?
Well, I mean, that is a very obvious one and probably not one that is a good moment, but of course also donations are helping. I mean, in the moment, again, I'm in the situation where I need to replace camera equipment, even for me to take pictures, because obviously I use stuff quite heavily over the years. So all this stuff that I can update and that I can have the proper equipment to take photographs to do that kind of thing. So financial donations are always welcome. In terms of other volunteering systems, it's something I'm going to look into because I had questions about this also from some guests that I had in the Maldives last month. Having now like a different platform, being able to use Scuba Scene, I hope that I can maybe by the end of the year can also think about another volunteer program so that people can come and support me maybe with some data analysis. And then if depending on where they do this from, that I can also might have a place on the boat. So maybe for like an internship thing again. So that's something that I'll be looking into. And of course, if I get a chance to do that, and if I get this organized, then I will post the details. And then if people have time that they can basically help me with, that might be something interesting for them then.
Cool. Question that I can probably answer actually, are flights included in your safari trips or are these booked separately? So as a fully bonded tour operator, we can book flights, or if you want to just book the boat only, you can do that as well. If you're not based in the UK, then you would have to go to another tour operator in your country. So I'm not sure what arrangements you've got with those sort of IELCA, but if you book directly with Scuba Scene, then obviously they can't do the flights because you have to be atoll rated.
Yeah, exactly.
We're back down to our last question, I think now. So when is the mating season for silkies? And I think it's a tricky one.
I mean, again, we actually here in Egypt, we see normally the fully grown silkies. I mean, the other day somebody said they saw a younger one, but generally we get the full grown adults. And I think they're coming up from the south because the main hotspot for silkies is further south in the Red Sea, and that counts both for the Saudi Arabian and the Sudanese coast. And there also they see larger aggregations of juvenile silkies. So what it looks like to me is that we have the oceanics, and then further south they have the silkies, and that's potentially also where breeding and mating is going on. But I have not really seen any information that anybody actually researched this, or if they know any details about this. Like I said, for most other sharks, the whole mating and breeding is a bit of a black box still that we don't know much about.
Cool. So I'm going to ask the very last question actually. Katya again would like to know what age you can do it from. So if I answer part of it and then you can answer it from the Red Sea perspective. So you can learn to dive or do the junior open water course from the age of 10. Obviously between 10 to 12 you're restricted on depth to 12 meters. Once you get to 13 you can go to 18 meters, but you are still restricted to 21 meters until you reach 15. We were talking about a family trip earlier on, where we can have. So one of the things if you've got a child on a trip with lots of more experienced divers, one can upset the other, which is why we're looking at doing a family trip. So we would probably start at maybe 13 for that particular trip. Have you got? If people wanted to book independently, Elke, what's the minimum age you would take on the boat, or is it just purely down to experience?
Yeah, it's down to experience and also what people want to do. We had a question of somebody that wanted to bring a younger child, not even necessarily even for diving or getting it in the water. And then, of course, it's a matter of the guardianship and the safety on board. So as long as one of the partners is staying on board with their child, because obviously that's not something that we can give to any crew member that we will take over, then we would be open for younger children as well. And when it comes to diving, really, it's a matter of experience and of guardianship. We had dive clubs that brought minors with them. And even if the parents are not there, then the group leader or the dive center owner is signing the guardianship. So as long as the legal side and the responsibilities are clear, I would say it depends on the diving experience. If it's about actually diving with us, with the group, with their guardian, and if it's about younger children, it's about making sure that they're safe on the boat and that they're not getting bored out of their skull and they cannot leave the boat. Ideally, for diving, it's about the experience. Yes.
Okay, cool. So that comes to the end of the question. As I mentioned earlier, this actual session has been recorded, so it's going to take ages for it to save and do things like that. But I'll stick it onto our YouTube channel. I'll send you a link, Elke, so you can send it to your community. I'll also put a link on the Oyster Diving Facebook page as well. So if anybody wants to share it or watch it back again or do anything with it again or see their questions being answered again, then we can do that. But in the meantime, I've had quite a few people just saying thank you very much. They found it massively interesting. I've had a few friends texting me as well saying that their kids have found it really enjoyable as well. And they want to know if they can start seeing sharks in the UK as well, which is quite nice. So.
Well, there's more than most people think, and obviously with the changes in water temperatures, there might be others coming in. So yeah, brace yourself. So yeah, why not?
We do a couple of shark trips in the UK. We do the blue shark trips, Cornwall. We're doing that in August, and we have done basket shark trips before as well. So
that might actually get me in the water in the UK as well. So maybe we can talk about that.
On behalf of everybody, Elke, it's been massively interesting and really, really good. So thank you very much. And I'm sure lots of people will be going off telling all their friends to look after sharks. And we'll put the link out for the Maldives fishing policy on our Facebook page and as many places as we can, just to stop the ridiculousness again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Right, thank you very much for organizing all of this, Mark.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there anything you want to say before I stop recording?
No, I love talking about sharks, as you might have noticed, so I take any opportunity. So yeah, thank you very much for organizing it and for hosting this for all of us. So yeah,